Good morning, it's Nick Robinson here for SUP FM and another podcast with Tristan Boxford, who is the CEO of the APP World Tour. Now, the APP is the Association of Paddleboard Professionals, which was formed in late 2017, but it's actually an extension of an organization that Tristan's been working on since 2010 or 2011. And you'll find out more about the history of this and how the ups and downs have happened. But basically, these guys nominate the world champion, the stand-up paddle world champion, every single year. So last year we had Casper Steinfurth in 2019 and Seychelles Webster as the world champions for 2019. Obviously, in 2020, we're having a little bit of a crazy year so far. So things are a little bit, but they still will be running later in the year. So keep an eye, and it's a really good time during this COVID-19 break, should we say. I know lots of horrible things are happening and my heart goes out to all those people affected. But a lot of other people around the world are pausing to reflect, and so is the APP. They're pausing not to reflect, but to work harder on what's coming in the future. So take a look deep into the APP. It's a fascinating institution, and it's an industry which was rife with fascinating stories too. So here we go. Tristan Boxford, CEO of the APP.
Aloha, and welcome to SUP FM, the podcast for stand-up paddleboarders everywhere. So with no further ado, let's get out on the water and on with the show. Here are your hosts, Nick and Simon.
Yeah, so, I'm
Fantastic.
pretty open with all the stuff anyway, so.
Excellent. Great. Well, Tristan, thanks so much for joining us on the SUP FM podcast. Really stoked to have you on.
Excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. So look, obviously right now, middle of COVID-19, I realize you're now based in one of my favorite little surf towns in Portugal. How did you get here from where you grew up?
It's kind of a long and windy story, but I actually grew up in England. Was born in France, but my grandfather was born and grew up here in Portugal, in Porto. And my mother ended up growing up here till she was about 12 or 13 in Portugal as well. And then moving back to England because her mother was English. So I grew up over there. And then when I never came to Portugal in my younger years. But when I started progressing as a professional windsurfer, I used to come here in my kind of mid to late teens to train in the summertime. And I'd spend the summers out here in Praia do Guincho and, just by Cascais. And I just fell in love with the country, the people, met a lot of really, really great friends that are still some of my greatest friends to this day. And at the time, actually, I tried to live here, as I was starting my fully fledged career. I'd graduated from university, but it was challenging because the center of the world for windsurfing back then was in Hawaii, and that was where everything was pointing me to. And I ended up moving out to Hawaii 20-something years ago and was over there until this point. So when I finally had the desire to come back to Europe and spend some more time in Europe, but also from a business perspective, needed somewhere a little bit more central, easier to manage the business from. Portugal was really the only choice for me coming back to Europe.
Well, it's a great place to be. I mean, Ericeira is such an amazing village. It's definitely got some decent surf up there. And do you get out every day?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's one of my prerequisites for living. Ocean sports and windsurfing, surfing, stand-up paddling, every aspect of them have been such an entrenched part of my life for, 30-something years. So, wherever I live, I have to be able to get in the water every day. And Portugal is one of the most wave-rich places I've ever been in my life. I'll even go as far as to say it's more consistent than Hawaii, which is for some people hard to believe, but it's impressively consistent. There's so many different kinds of breaks. I love it here. The water temperature is cold. That takes a little getting used to, but other than that, I love it. I find it a beautiful place, and definitely is home to me like Hawaii is home to me as well.
Yeah, you're spot on there with the consistency, because I actually saw some statistics. I think it was from Surfline or something. They were saying that Ericeira itself is probably 42% of the time it breaks, which is probably one of the most consistent waves in the world. So that's quite incredible.
Yeah, I think you can surf 340 something days a year. Honestly, between longboarding and all the different kinds of surfing, it's very rare a day where you can't get in the water.
So do you do a lot of SUP surfing now?
I'm predominantly SUP surfing, I'd say. I still shortboard, I still longboard, and I still windsurf. But probably 80% of the time I'm stand-up paddle surfing. So
okay. So how did you get into SUP? I mean, can you relate the very first time when you jumped on a board? What did it feel like, and where was it?
I was in Hawaii, and it was a gradual thing. It was something that came around. Laird was starting to get involved with it back in the kind of early to mid 2000s, first decade there. And he was surfing when it was bigger. I remember a couple of windier days at Lanes, which is just to the left of Ho'okipa on the north shore of Maui. And he was riding this giant sort of 11 or 12 foot board. And it was big and windy and pretty hectic actually for a stand-up board. But it was interesting. It was just another dimension of surfing for me as I was looking at it back then. And, and then we actually produced an event before I'd even really got into the sport. I'd done it a few times. And it was interesting to me because it kind of drew from a number of different water sports backgrounds. But we ended up producing an event called the Ocean Games back in 2007 that had shortboard, longboard, stand-up, windsurf, kite, surf canoe, tandem. So every form of riding waves that you could imagine. And it was actually the first stand-up contest, I think, ever. But it was a part of this Ocean Games event. So it was a super cool experience. We had everyone from Dave Kalama to Ekolu Kalama, Robbie Nash, Bonga Perkins, all these kind of guys participating. And, it was a start of something. I then moved to Kauai and completely fell in love with the sport because of the, number one, being a windsurfer, you used to having something in your hands and using it to turn the board to your advantage. Number two, I'm a bigger guy, so a bigger board, I can turn a bigger board easier than smaller people. So it kind of really fit my style of surfing, and I just completely fell in love with it during that time in Kauai. And that passion has only kind of grown more as time has gone on.
But so why the hop from windsurfing to SUP? I mean, when did you really think that you could get into the business of SUP, and how did that come about?
I wouldn't say it was really a hop from windsurfing to SUP. I think, like I said, I produced that event called the Ocean Games back in 2007. My foray kind of into the events and media world from being an athlete was earlier than that. Started to create some reality TV projects around action sports in general. Windsurfing being kind of my core base and background. But I was very involved in the surfing world as well. So kind of I saw it all as connecting, as all these different sports that had the ocean and riding surfing in common. And stand-up paddling was really the first sport that seemed to connect the dots between all the different ocean sports. In the past, you're either a shortboarder, you're a longboarder, you're a windsurfer, you're a kite surfer, whereas stand-up paddling kind of drew from all the different sports. And, while I think it's rich to say it's a waterman sport, the people who end up being really, really good at it are the guys who are kind of versatile and able to switch between the different sports. And I think that's what attracted me the most.
So is that what led you to eventually create the Waterman League?
Exactly. I was building off that Ocean Games experience. It was this idea of a connection point for all the sports, and stand-up paddling was such a logical first step for an organization that was called the Waterman League, because, as I said, it kind of stretched into all these demographics, from canoe paddling to surfing to all forms of water sports. So that's what led to the launch of that. And I was consulting with all that kind of uncles of ocean sports, as they're known in Hawaii during that time. And I presented the idea of, at that time, it was just a surfing world tour. The idea of building something that could grow for the future. And they loved the idea and got all behind it. We had an advisory board of Brian Kealana, Achi Kalepa, Robbie Nash, Kainoa McGee, Bonga Perkins, and Dwayne DeSoto, a lot of the guys that were kind of in their early days of stand-up paddling and sort of laying the foundations for the sport, so to speak. And so, we started with an exhibition event in 2009 and launched the full tour in 2010.
But, when you talk about traditional SUP events now, I mean, there's always been a challenge between the racing side and the surfing side. So how has that played out over the years? Because obviously, like you were saying, this is a diverse mix of all the different ways of wave riding. But how did the racing side factor in those days?
I don't really see it as a competition between the two. I think it's a natural evolution of the sport. When we started, Battle the Paddle started around the same time as our surfing events. And back then it was very much a community event, but racing was sort of on the, behind surfing at that point. Surfing was the sport of stand-up paddling in those early days. Laird and those guys were doing downwind runs. That was starting to become something. But it was very, very early days. And certainly when we launched the tour, the focus was purely on surfing. But over those first couple of years, it became clear that, there was a real opportunity with racing, because you're no longer restricted to ocean venues. It's a first across the line format, which for competition is always a great thing. And there was this new breed of athletes that were coming up. Kai was able to adapt to those kind of things. Connor Baxter was becoming a dominant force. You had Danny Ching from a different kind of OC background, Travis Grant. You had all these people coming from these different sectors and converging on a discipline that was could be really exciting and had a lot of potential. And we saw the growth potential of it and launched the kind of Racing World Series in end of 2011.
Right. I mean, surely it must be, logistically, it must be difficult to try and put a surfing competition, mix it in with a racing competition at times.
Yeah, in the early days especially, because we grew this company from the ground up. We didn't have any startup capital or anything like that. I built it off relationships that I had in all the different places. I've been somewhat of a global citizen all my life, so I had good contacts all over the world. Which allowed us to kind of build immediately a 5-event tour from nothing. And then we, as the sport sort of blew up globally, it was still in its early days. So everybody wanted to run an event and we were keen to have global expansion. So we started bouncing all over the world. And those days started to get really, really complicated. And it meant that, their capacity to be able to produce a world-class event or provide the infrastructure for a world-class event perhaps wasn't as high as it should be. And our ability to move people around the world with the budgets that we were working with were challenging. So, it was a time where we did a lot of bouncing around the world. We did a lot of everything ourselves. But it was an exciting time and it was a lot to juggle, but it was interesting.
So that was that was sort of 2011, right?
Yeah,
more or less.
Like 2011, the launch of it. At the end of it, we launched with the Turtle Bay finals as a Turtle Bay kind of exhibition event, and then we launched the tour in 2012 for racing.
Okay, so then from 2012 coming up to the present day, obviously a lot has gone on and things have changed quite a lot, and also a name change to the APP World Tour. So how did that all come about? Can you just take us through the last 9 years?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, 2012 to 16 was kind of just what I said. We produced events in six continents. We produced events in everywhere from Lake Grey up in Patagonia to Hamburg to Finland to everywhere you could possibly imagine. We did a downwind race from Nathandola down to Namotu in Fiji. We literally did it all, which was really exciting and really interesting to explore. The boundaries of where you could take the sport, because it's just so versatile and it's so adaptable to wherever you go, which was such an exciting element to it. But as we grew, it was, the bandwidth was getting more and more challenging. We were sort of caught in that difficult space between kind of grassroots, grouping together some third-party events and a professional platform, like the World Surf League or the Windsurfing Association that were producing professional events for a sport. And we were such a small team that weren't funded. We were just building it through grant hard work, as I said, and sponsorship. So we got to a point where, we needed to evaluate what was the best next step. And it was starting to become really challenging to grow because we were just permanently running and there was no chance to reflect, no time to catch up and catch a breath. So around end of 2017 or through 2017, we did a capital raise, finally raised some funds to be able to, reinvigorate the organization, figure out a kind of a refined vision for what it should be, and kind of move heavily in that direction. And that's what happened late 2017. We had that incredible Red Bull heavy water event, which was held in the most radical conditions imaginable.
I remember that.
We rolled straight into a rebranding as APP World Tour. We took a new focus on the major markets. And we said, the beauty of water sports is all this, everybody coming together for a festival to appreciate the sport. And what we found were some of the limiting factors and the event coordinators were finding was that when you produce events in core pockets, core communities, you have your core community, but to grow beyond that is quite difficult because it requires people to come out to your venue. And so we saw the opportunity with this versatile sport to bring surfing to the people. And that's really what the City Paddle Festival's concept was about, was this ability to bring major, exciting events to major city venues that big corporate brands can get around, major activations can be had. And, this has been a big growing feature of what we've done over the last 2 years with the launch of the new APP World Tour, with our events in London, New York, Osaka, Paris, where we're seeing meaningful numbers both on the water but off the water as well. In New York, we had 30,000 people come through the site. And it was one of the most refreshing things to have people. The number one question was, I never realized that this was, kind of a professional sport. This is something that I've tried once on holiday, or I saw here, or it's been in an advert. I didn't realize it was this. This is exciting. We had a big screen up underneath the Freedom Tower. We had built a 20 meter by 10 meter inflatable pool that we had kids clinics going all day. So, that's sort of the approach of the APP has been to, on the one side, to professionalize the sport, create a meaningful global tour that the professionals can follow. But at the bottom end, create the most accessible access point for the sport possible, and really create a festival atmosphere that makes it something not intimidating and something very inclusive for people to get engaged with.
Excellent. So you're covering the whole gamut of everybody just starting and learning, and also the pros themselves.
Exactly. We want to connect the gap that there is between a core racing community and the rest of the world. Because what people, when people get excited and all into the racing side of things, they forget that it's probably 8% of the market or 10% of the market. And, 90% is people who are free riding, having fun, whether it be surfing, whether it be paddling on a lake, whether it be just trying the sport for the first time. And what we want to do is bring all those people together into one kind of community that can really engage in the sport and support its future growth.
Yeah, and it's amazing. You touched on the fact that not many people are aware of the world tour. People just think stand-up paddling is something fun to do on holiday. Because I used to run a SUP touring company down here in Portugal. And it was unbelievable. I said, "Oh, you guys realize that there's a world champion?" And they're like, "Oh no, we didn't even know it was a sport." So it's really nice to see the people understanding a little bit more about it now, and getting to grips with the fact that it's a professional sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been an interesting process. It's an education process. It's, a lot of work and effort put into creating media that can surpass just core market outputs. So we do TV for CBS, for Fox, for Eurosport, for all kinds of international networks, so that we can tell the story of stand-up paddling beyond just our core market, because that ultimately is how we're going to be able to grow it. It's what helps to get tourism boards interested, host venues, all the different things that are necessary in order for a sport to really move forward and have a legitimate professional platform.
Yeah, because it appears that you're shifting a little in your content generation with immersed TV. And how do you see the future of APP content generation?
It's always been something we've wanted to embark on, but bandwidth is always your biggest enemy when you're building and growing all the time. We're taking this kind of forced time off at the moment, which is not time off obviously at all, but
yeah.
we're taking this time to restructure a little bit. We're revamping a lot of the ways we operate, what media goes out when, being a lot more strategic with it, creating a new streams of content. One of the biggest frustrations is, we've been producing content for the sport of stand-up paddling for the last kind of 11 or 12 years. And we have the most massive vault of like high quality HD content that, 70% of it hasn't even been seen. We produce the live broadcast, we put out highlights, we do the things we do, but then it's like pack up, put those drives down, move on to the next event. And, the luxury of this period now is that we're starting to dive into that content, really tell the more stories about the athletes, really build the engagement that we can around the tour that just extends right beyond just events. So that's definitely one big part of it. Immersive TV is just one of those products that we're looking to roll out over the next few months as we grow here.
Okay. And when you go around the world to all these different competitions, do you guys do it all in-house? Do you take a team with you, or do you contract somebody else to do that?
We have a core team. So I've got a media producer that's been with me for well over a decade. Actually, I met my wife and I met him 1 week apart. We always joke about it. It's my two wives. He's been sort of my right-hand man in terms of growing the media product over the last 10 years. And then we have a few core team members with him supporting him. But outside of that, we have a core kind of group of contractors in each global region that help us to produce the content that we do in each area. But the content essentially is all produced in-house, but it's through a network of contractors that are regular contractors with us that have been working with us for the last decade, basically. So,
Well, it's great. You guys are doing a great job. It's wonderful to watch the live streams. It really is amazing. But just hopping back to that world tour itself, are there any lessons to learn, either good or bad, from other world tours and different sports that you can relate to?
100%. I spend a lot of time analyzing, what happens in other sports, how other sports have grown. And I try to take the lessons they learned and the lessons they continue to learn and the lessons that we continue to learn along this journey. I think nothing is ever perfect, and that's what's great about life. You're always learning. But I certainly analyze everything going on with the WSL, as a close comparison, being part of the surfing sport family. And that's something that, I look at it, it's something they've had the luxury of having a lot of capital investment. They built an incredible product over the last few years of incredibly high quality programming. but it's somewhat over-engineered for the market as it is now. And that's something that, we want to build organically and build something that can stand the test of time and really grow for the years to come. So, those are some of the lessons we learned. I think, looking at Ironman, looking at Tough Mudder, we're trying to be as one-dimensional as possible, where there's multiple business units, multiple revenue streams to help the business grow and support the business, ways in which we can engage with both the endemic industry for bringing larger corporate brands. I think it's such a unique product that we have. It's a hybrid of so many things that I think there's a lot of different pockets of like you said, lessons we can learn from festivals, from mass participation sports events, from core lifestyle events like surfing, to endurance events. And I think if you can bring the best of all those things into one product and deliver something, of high quality, I think that's the end goal.
Absolutely. Sure. And what about the Windsurfing World Tour? Is that an example to follow or not?
It is. I think, windsurfing's got a more challenging kind of roadmap than we do now. It's a sport that's kind of diminished in size and popularity compared to where we're at, where we're in a growth, we're in a growth period right now with stand-up paddling. A lot of the core industry will say that it's slowed down and it's doing this, but at the end of the day, I think the international pickup is still growing massively. It's just the core industry following is tapered off a little bit, or is flattened, I should say. But windsurfing is definitely diminished a lot. It's a really exciting sport, but it has a lot of barriers to entry in terms of, cost of product, in terms of difficulty, and all the kind of challenging variables that the sport has compared to stand-up paddling, where anywhere you are, anywhere there's a body of water, you can jump on the water and do something. And I think it is an incredible attribute to the sport, and it provides real hope for the future.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'd love to get into the stats a little bit later about the SUP industry, but for now, I think I always seen a problem myself with how do you deal with different world champions from different areas? Like, for example, Casper Steinfath and Seychelles are the APT World Tour champions, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at example for, I love SUP Racer. I don't know if you follow SUP Racer, but it's a fantastic blog. And he's got a whole set of rankings, which take about 113 global races into account. And then Casper is just 10th on those rankings. Then there's the ISA World Championships and the ICF as well. So how do all these competing factors play out for you?
Well, I think there's two pockets there. On the one hand, the ISA is the IOC Federation for Surfing Sports. They traditionally have produced a yearly world championship. I always look at it more of a games, where it's gold, silver, bronze, which is how they award their awards anyway. So that's the sort of differentiation, in my opinion. A winner at the ISA event is more of a gold medalist rather than a world champion, I would say. But, they obviously have, based on the other sports models where they have world championships organized by the federation and then the professional sporting body, they're two different things. And that's parallels across all the different sports. So there's two different pockets of I'd say confusion there in some respects. On the one side, you have the federation level, which is, the ISA is the Federation for Surfing Sports. They produce a single event each year, which is somewhat of a stand-up paddle games. I like to see it as, rather than a world championships, because a professional tour crowns a world champion at the culmination of the season, whereas the Federation World Championships is an annual event in the same way that it is in athletics and in many different sports under the kind of IOC model. So that's the differentiation there. They retain the world championship title because of the parallels with other sports. But again, I kind of see it more as a gold medalist as opposed to, world champion. But, there's two ways of looking at that.
Absolutely. And the Canoe Federation, I mean, because they've always been trying to it appears that they've been trying to get their hands on stand-up paddle for years. And it's always, I know definitely in Portugal as well, there was they ran the sport down here as well before the Surf Federation tried to get it away. So I'm not sure where it is at the moment, but that's also a big challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an unfortunate battle the last few years. For the first sort of 9 or 10 years of development, the ICF showed no interest in stand-up paddling. And then in the last few years, as IOC changes its vision as far as kind of being more modern and embracing new sports and new trends, I think the ICF realized it was important to jump on something that was gaining quickly in popularity across the globe, and kind of technically fits into their realm because people are using a paddle. What they didn't take into account was that the ISA had been working in the sport for nearly a decade, and that stand-up paddling at its roots is a surfing sport. So, obviously there's different perspectives on that and different arguments around that, but I really bring it back to those two key points that, really stand-up paddling is a surfing sport. It's a board riding sport. Yes, they have a paddle, but its roots are in surfing. ISA has been nurturing the sport since 2008. They've been building this legacy, and the ICF jumped on the bandwagon really, really late, jumped on a couple of existing events for a year or so, but not wholeheartedly. And then they did their first event in China, I think it was last year, and said, we've done more for the sport than anyone. So that I felt was a little unwarranted. But there's an arbitration battle going on, at a federation level. So, we're waiting for the final decision on that in the next few months as to who the IOC will recognize as the official federation for stand-up paddling. Obviously, I'm pretty clear on where we stand. We certainly stand for the ISA because we believe it's important not only from a what is right perspective, but also for the future of the sport. A lot of sports depend on really solid and valuable marketing efforts. And the reason why the ICF loves stand-up paddling so much, and the reason why stand-up paddling has such huge popularity, is because it's connected to the surfing lifestyle. It's It's got that surfing allure that transcends other sports in some respects. But it's the most accessible form of surfing, and that's what makes it so attractive. And the paddle sports struggle in that area because it's not such an all-access, such an appealing venture to jump in a kayak and do something while a lot of people kayak, and I'm not taking it away from that. It's that surfing element brings a little bit of a wow factor to stand-up paddling and certainly helps with the marketing of it at a global level. And I can speak on that from experience of the last decade of selling, the World Championship.
Sure. And it's also lovely to see that you're certified by the ISA along with the WSL. So that does give you a lot of legitimacy, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely helps. It definitely helps. So, we're very supportive of that. And, I respect anything that happens in the sport, and, we'll obviously run with it. But, we have our firm belief of what is right and what is important for the sport. And that's the kind of the position where we stand. And then as far as the other various rankings and things that are out there, I don't think in any other sport people would say, imagine if we're going to say Djokovic, he won on the ATP rankings, but if we count, the 147 events that happen elsewhere in the world into one ranking, he might not be number one. I think at the end of the day, at some point at a professional level, there needs to be a comprehensive tour where all the best in the world are consistently up against each other at every stop. Otherwise, Danny Ching was here one week, Connor was there next week. We're going to roughly put together points and end up with a winner. Casper competed against Danny, Artur, Connor, Daniel Hosoyo, Bruno Hosoyo, all those athletes through the year, and he won. And that's really what it comes down to. And for the marketing of any sport, that's an important thing. And while it's great to see community sites like SUP Racer and Total SUP and all these guys following the sport and creating fan engagement through what they're doing, I think it's a mistake to look at that as a confusion from a title perspective. I think it's a journalist analysis from their perspective of the sport rather than a world tour platform that decides a world champion.
Sure, absolutely. And while we're talking about world champions, could you just explain for those of you people out there who don't know the World Championship point scoring system?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for surfing, it's quite simple. We have the events that happen in the year, depending on how many events there are. There's a discard or not a discard. This year, we don't have a discard. So it's based on the 3 events. And we have a point system from 10,000 going down from there. So obviously the most points wins. In racing, the ultimate accolade, which we tried to keep simple for the reasons we just discussed there, because we want the public to be able to understand it instantly and not say, but hang on a second, isn't this guy world champion? We wanted to keep it really simple. There's one overall world champion, and it's the overall best racer in the world. And that's across all kinds of different conditions, different formats, and with the primary distances being, a distance race, 10 kilometers or more, and a sprint race, sprint elimination, which identifies the fastest sprint racer. And while we do celebrate those 2 disciplines independently, and we say that this is the fastest, the world champion sprint racer essentially in the year, the world title is based on the two results combined. And it's a similar point system to surfing, where they'll gain points in both distance races and sprint races, and those points are combined to create their overall title.
So they get 10,000 points for a win in a race as well?
Well, they get 10,000 points for a win in a distance race and 10,000 points for a win in a sprint race, for example.
Okay.
And then at the end of the year, what we did in the earlier days of the World Tour, we did it where it was event wins that culminated in the title. And we transitioned to say to accumulate the race wins in each through the year. So, for example, Casper counted Red Bull Heavy Water, and he counted the sprint in New York. I can't remember if that was exactly the case, but he was able to discard one distance race and one sprint race, and it wasn't they weren't counted as event wins. So each win was counted independently, if that makes sense. So distance win got you 10,000 in New York, and your distance win in Paris got you 10,000. Your sprint third place got you 6,500 points in Osaka, and and it's kind of done like that, where you choose your best results, your best distances. I think last year it was your best 4 distances and the best 4 sprints that calculated the overall result.
Okay, let's look back over 2019, because there were 8 events in 2019, right? 5 racing and 3 surfing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So which one stood out for you the most?
4 actually. We had 4 surfing, in fact.
Oh, what is that? Barbados, Gran Canaria?
Gran Canaria, Barbados, New York, and Sunset.
Oh, of course, you surfed in New York as well, right? Yeah. So New York was like a double event where you surfed and raced.
Exactly. So we had the race around Statue of Liberty for the distance, which is sort of that iconic city race. And then we had surf sprint racing out in Long Beach and surfing out in Long Beach.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what are the planned events for 2020? Obviously, the virus has put a spanner in the works, but what are the planned events, and what do you think are actually going to happen this year?
It was super unfortunate. We were looking to bring back Maui as a kind of downwind special event this year. And the idea of that was to really celebrate, downwind racing, which is generally the athlete's favorite as far as racing is concerned. And we had a unique format that was more akin to surfing, where you have a holding period and you can pick the best days within that holding period. So that was planned for this year. Unfortunately, that was for early July. And given everything going on in the world and the uncertainty that we're still in, we took the decision fairly early to say the first 2 events, which would have been Pornichet in France and Maui, we had to pull off the calendar for just to give people some kind of certainty in these uncertain times, rather than wondering if and how they adapt their training and are they going to be able to travel, and all the difficulties that come with preparing for a World Championship Tour.
Great. Okay, I just got one last question about the World Tour.
Yeah.
It was an amazing event, like the Euro Tour popped up a couple of years back, and I just think they're doing a fantastic job. Does the APP World Tour interface with the Euro Tour at all?
We're definitely open, and I think what they've developed by linking together independent events across Europe and facilitating travel between the events and promoting centrally through the Euro Tours, it definitely it's a great model for European development, and I think it is a super cool grassroots series. We have been looking at it from a qualification standpoint. We used results from those events this past year to qualify for this year's tour. We're exploring always how we can work together with the various different organizations and bodies across the globe to really help growth of the sport. Because communication and collaboration is always the most efficient way of going forward and the best way for everybody. Excellent.
Great. So can we just dig into the SUP industry a bit? I mean, because obviously being at the forefront of the industry, you must have an idea of some of the stats. So if you could draw a graph about the growth of the SUP industry, what would it look like starting in, say, 2005 or something?
I think in the early days, it grew as a kind of core sport. So the early stage was quick pickup from like water sports users in general. As you look to windsurfing, kite surfing, even outrigger canoe and those kind of sports transferred over to it pretty quickly. But then suddenly it started snowballing as hotels and tour operators such as yourself and all these kind of other sectors started taking interest and realizing, wow, this is, rather than windsurfing where you don't know what board and sail you need to have for people to be able to use, and likely the one you have isn't going to be right for the people that come. Stand-up paddling, if you have a board and a paddle, somebody can go out and do something. So it was a really cool opportunity for tourism destinations. Production became a lot cheaper. You saw a lot of kind of no-brand boards, which a lot of the industry hate. But in some ways, it's kind of a blessing too, because it creates a low-cost entry to the sport. And if people really engage in a sport, generally they'll kind of progress sport to gear up to get something really good. That Costco board isn't going to do the same in 2 months' time. You're going to want, whatever it is, an Infinity or an Ash or a Starboard or something like that. I think what's going on in the industry right now is that massive boom that happened over the first sort of decade, where a lot of the big brands that we know, the Starboards, the Nashes, the Fanatics, the SICs, they grew really quickly, and the boards that were available were these kind of premium boards that everybody was willing to spend on, because it wasn't a huge investment. It was a significant investment, but it wasn't out of control. And then suddenly this wave of kind of copies and no brand boards came to the marketplace and sort of flooded the marketplace, which took a lot of sales away from those core brands. Then you have your dedicated, passionate enthusiasts who perhaps they're not buying boards as often as they were. And so it slows that growth trend for the brands. And a lot of those brands kind of did their 5-year projections based on this continued growth, and then suddenly it flattened more. So I think it created a transition point for the industry that we're currently in. Obviously it's negative because it's a tail off as far as global sales are concerned for those core brands. But overall, I think in terms of the sport's growth, it's still on a healthy increase. And I think if we manage the sport correctly, which is one of the things, that we're obviously committed to do as an organization, is to figure out how we can engage these, every now and then enthusiasts to become passionate sports enthusiasts. Because that's what's going to grow the ultimate growth for the core endemic brands with a higher price point board and quality boards. And to make the whole place more, healthier. And then you still have these cheaper boards to get people on the water and out there. And then you kind of have progression into the sport through the premium brands.
Absolutely. And so how many people do you reckon stand up paddle worldwide right now, in your opinion?
I've seen so many millions of estimates. We even had an independent study done, and, there was some pretty ambitious numbers. But, I kind of look at it like I've seen a lot of surfing reports too, where they talk about the number of surfers. And I think it's more people who are interested in surfing rather than people who actually surf. Whereas I think, potentially some of the stats for stand-up paddling are interesting because, the likelihood of them actually being practitioners is a lot higher because it's a lot easier to do. But we saw an estimated Facebook reach of 63 million, but I don't think that's how many stand-up paddlers there are. But, when you think about the growth, even in countries like India, Russia, China, all these territories are starting to actually grow significantly with the sport. And we've been getting some great reports in those areas, on top of the European growth that has been accelerating a lot more over the last few years. It's probably slowed a little bit now, but still growing fast. US is the growth curve slowed a little bit, but again, I think at that entry level, it's still going pretty fast.
So, if you could put a number on it, because 63 million sounds crazy, because I know the surf, supposedly there's between 17 and 35 million surfers in the world, according to the ISA, I think it was, and a couple of studies that were done over the last 10 years. Right. But you reckon, I don't know, if you just put a number on it, like it's really, really tough. What, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million?
Yeah, I would say it's not far off surfing at all, and if not rapidly, potentially overtaking pretty soon. Because if you think about the different applications that stand-up paddling has and the different, leisure activities that are focused around stand-up paddling, from SUP yoga to fishing to being in whitewater to being on rivers to, and the locations that you can do it, these new regions that, Hungary, any of these countries, the fact that our world champion is from Denmark. I remember in the early days when Casper used to come and do the event in Sunset, our Hawaiian commentator was like, would joke about the fact that from the great surfing nation of Denmark,
what's it called? Cold Hawaii.
Yeah. And now it's Cold Hawaii, and it's developed this whole resurgence of like interest in surf culture. And I think the whole thing is just so positive. And I think that is where those numbers, going back to the numbers, I think, the growth is the growth potential is significant, and the real growth, while hard to estimate, has to be coming up to equal to surfing, if not surpassing it.
Wow, that's amazing. Because I remember Laird Hamilton saying years ago, he said, I'm predicting that SUP can be much bigger than surfing. Because as you said, all those reasons that you said, it makes so much sense because it's so much more diverse.
Yeah. And quite frankly, surfing is really difficult. And I'm the most passionate surfer ever, but you see people going out for their first time, and the amount of people that will get demoralized on the first session and never go back is probably pretty high, because you go out, get a beating in the shore break, and you come in feeling pretty demoralized because you didn't even get out once. And stand-up paddling, you kind of have the opposite impact, where you jump on a board the first time and you feel like a hero.
Yeah.
Because you're paddling up and down and you do it right away. And that's a really satisfying thing.
Mm-hmm. So listen, if you're a kid looking to make a profession out of SUP, probably like, maybe you were when you were starting out in the windsurfing pro scenario, do you reckon that's an option for kids to make a career out of SUP these days? Is there enough cash in the sport?
I think it's still early days. It's still challenging for, especially depending on the industry brands that are, and, as we discussed, that they're having to kind of rethink their strategies and how they build for the future. At the moment, it's still, it's definitely a possibility, but it's challenging. I think the future is a lot brighter. I think the growth potential and we see it more as like a PGA model of people being able to be instructors, people being able to choose different places in the sport that can subsidize a pathway to a career on the world tour, for example, so that it becomes more of an open opportunity for people rather than just like those who've got some cash or are lucky with one sponsor to go, or, going from prize money to prize money. It makes it a bit of an easier road. But I definitely see it as a 100% viable prospect. We see enough pros able to engage and follow the whole tour. And, from a qualifying perspective, there's a lot of opportunity too.
Because many of the pros are doing that as well, supplementing their income already, doing retreats and, obviously courses and all kinds of things, writing books, all kinds of amazing ways of supplementing the income, right?
Exactly. And that's, the sport has that kind of diversity of appeal where you can be quite creative with how you make money. It's not just that one result that's going to, make your career. I was fortunate to see that as a windsurfer because, windsurfing is not the biggest sport in the world. And when I was doing my career, I saw the opportunity to write stories and tell stories from a unique way of life. And that helped me, make my career happen in windsurfing, in addition to obviously competing on the tour. But it was certainly not one dimensional in terms of how I approached it. And I think the athletes of today have realized that. And in this modern world, you have to be quite versatile. You got to be ready with more than just talent to have a professional sporting career.
Mm. I know like SUP racing is an elite sport by definition and by name. So what does the APP do to build the sport at a more basic level? I know you've touched on this a little bit before, but if you could just expand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, we when we kind of refined our model back at the end of 2017, we looked at Paris as an example of kind of that more mass participation opportunity. And it wasn't necessarily the engaged regular racer. It was everybody. It was a chance to engage bucket list people who were just in it for a laugh, and to capture that spirit of fun and entertainment as well as, competition. And that's really, I think the magic of it for the future. For the APP, we want to hit all these various targets. On the one side, we want to create a professional platform that provides a dynamic spectacle for the audiences from a media and on-site perspective, creates icons in the sport that youth can look up to and say, wow, I want to do that in my life. I want to be a stand-up paddler. This is it. I want to be Zane Schwartz. I want to be Kai Lenny. I want to be one of these guys. And then, at a qualified level, provide opportunity for young kids to get into the sport and competitive adults to come in and fight for their way to get onto tour. And then from a kind of amateur level, to have competitive racing that's fun in cool locations, with a great community around it. And then at an entry level for people to jump in and just be involved from a participatory standpoint without necessarily the goal of being a regional champion or beating your mate or whatever it might be. So I think it's trying to figure out how you can cater to all those different elements. And that's what we've tried to do with the City Paddle Festival concept is exactly that, is try to reach that market that's just, we love SUP yoga and just cruising around with our friends on a board. Well, you can do that at an event there. There's SUP yoga clinics, there's a gathering of like-minded people. And you'll find you've got a lot more in common with even the competitive sports people at that gathering, because you're all sharing in one passion, which is being on the water and paddling around. And that's kind of the spirit of what we're trying to build.
Where's that in Paris?
This is in New York. This is in Paris. This is in London, Osaka.
Oh, brilliant! So there's a mass participation thing in every event.
Exactly. Well, not every event.
Oh, fantastic.
Events. Yeah. So, for example, in Osaka, we had 450 participants, I think, paddling through the center of the city. We had 10,000 people coming through the site, even despite pretty crappy weather. And we had, we built this inflatable pool concept that we kind of put in all our major city events. That's a 20 meter by 10 meter inflatable pool. It's about waist deep. It's great for doing clinics for kids. It's great for SUP yoga sessions. So you have that at the center of the venue. You have racing going on around it. There's movie presentations. There's other yoga clinics. There's vendors. There's, kind of a lot of different things going on. And it's still, we're refining the concept and refining the offering and building out what this can be for the future. But the basis of it is that. And in Paris, it's 1,000 people on the start line on the River Seine, and inside the boat show, it's a packed arena for the guys to check out the fastest sprint racing in the game in a pool.
It all sounds super exciting. So what's next for the APP as a brand?
We just, like I said, it's been one of those weird times where on the one hand, obviously it's just absolutely horrible what's going on in the world, and really obviously hoping and praying it all clears up really quickly here. But at the same time, it's given us a chance to get off the hamster wheel, I call it, because we're permanently running event to event, season to season, and it's very rare you get a chance to just step back and look at everything and review everything and figure things out. So we're really taking that opportunity right now to refine our approach for the next 3 to 5 years, so that once the trigger can be pulled to reignite all the events and get everybody back on tour and get all the crew out there, we're faster and better and more efficient and more successful than ever from that perspective. And as far as the vision for the tour for the coming years, we got some really exciting new venues that are coming to the table for 2021 and beyond, both from a surfing and a racing perspective. Really cool new backdrops, new communities we're going into. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then, at a grassroots level, we're definitely focusing on some regional build out, grassroots events, supporting them as much as we can across the globe so that we can create a much more robust infrastructure for the sport that, kind of has a consolidated approach, guidelines and structure to it.
Sounds fantastic. Well, it sounds like a lot of work to be done as well. But Tristan, thanks so much for coming on to SUP FM. We really, really do appreciate it. Where can we follow you online?
My pleasure. You can follow, appworldtour.com is obviously our main site, APP World Tour for both Instagram and Facebook. I'm not the big personal social media guy, but I'm generally behind the scenes and and operating APP World Tour. Those are the main platforms to check out.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks again. It's been amazing chatting to you. So thanks so much.
My absolute pleasure, Nick. And come up and see us in Ericeira.
Yeah, I'd love to. Definitely. Always keen to go for a wave up there. And that was Tristan Boxford from the APP World Tour. So it's a fascinating insight into how the top echelons of the sport work. And it sounds from that interview how tirelessly Tristan's been working for the last 10 years just to try and promote the sport and to try and obviously create a career out of it too, but to try and make a single point for the world champions and for great competition around the world. So a lot has been said about the APP in the past, and I think they're great. I think they're an amazing system, and I really support them, and I hope you do too. So thanks so much for listening. If you want to check out the show notes, there are a couple of links there which we can put through. Check out www.supfm.show, and we'll link it all up for you. Just remember, guys, we are working tirelessly ourselves to bring all this amazing input to you, all this amazing content to you. And if you do feel like we deserve something for all that work, well, then support us on Patreon, patreon.com/SUPFM. We've got quite a few interesting little fun things to have there. So if you do support us, we will reward you in certain ways. So what else is there to say? But just stay safe out there. I mean, it's crazy times, and it just feels to me like the world is obviously in America, things are going really bad right now. I mean, when I record this, it's late April, and things are not going so well in the United States. But the rest of the world and the epicenters that were happening a couple of weeks ago are starting to think about post-COVID-19 and a little few. The world is looking like it's re-energizing itself a little. Obviously, it's going to be a long time before anything returns to normal. But it's good to see things starting to think about the other side of this horrendous virus. So thanks so much for listening, and stay safe out there, all of you guys. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to SUP FM, the #1 podcast for stand-up paddlers wherever you are. If you like what you've heard, please leave us a review on iTunes. Until then, we'll see you on the water.